Defence Minister Judith Collins says the presence of Chinese warships carrying out live fire exercises in the Tasman Sea is unusual, but nothing Kiwis need to be worried about. The New Zealand Defence Force, in conjunction with Australian authorities, are continuing to monitor the 3 naval ships off the coast of Australia's Tasmania. Flights between the 2 countries had to be diverted earlier with complaints there was no prior warning given. Prime Minister Christopher Luxon says China did not inform New Zealand before carrying out the live fire drill on Friday, but China says complaints from us and Australia have been hyped, unreasonable and inconsistent with the facts. Joining me now is former Minister of Defence, Ron Mark. Ron, hey, good to talk to you.
Hello, Leah. How are you?
I'm good. And I know you're very busy being Carterton of Mayor as well. Mayor's Carterton, the Mayor of Carterton, busy.
And other jobs.
And other jobs, that's right. But Ron, so I appreciate your time this afternoon. Should we be concerned about these warships moving further south? Why the Tasman Sea?
Well, I don't think we need to panic or hyperventilate, but it is unusual. It is not something that's occurred before. There was clearly no conversation between the Chinese ambassador and the Minister of Foreign Affairs or the Prime Minister prior to this visit into the Tasman. So I guess we should be guarded. And I guess what I'm seeing right now is some very polite Diplo speak. And
yes.
that will not necessarily be an indication of how concerned people really are.
And China is no surprise, Ron, they're downplaying it. There is nothing illegal about what their presence and what they've done. Does it feel like to you that they're testing boundaries?
I think China's doing what China knows it can do. It's interesting because in my bilaterals, and I had numerous bilaterals with General Wei and with General Shi Liang back in those days, we always were very good at explaining to each other how valued our friendship was and how we'd had a long history of friendship, collaboration, cooperation, and how important China is to the New Zealand economy. But as I used to reiterate to the generals, is that good friends are always upfront with each other. Good friends are always honest with each other. Good friends never take each other by surprise. And if a good friend's going to visit, I would say today, a good friend would give you a phone call first, just to make sure that you were at home and everything was okay for such a visit. And might even probably go so far as to explain what the visit was all about, and particularly if weapons were going to be fired, clearly in international law and clearly in compliance with international law, that there might be some little bit of a heads up. But the fact that there wasn't in itself raises questions, and those are questions that China should be answering, but clearly won't.
Do you think, Ron, there's a link perhaps with the Cook Islands flailing relationship with us?
Absolutely. I mean, it wasn't lost on me. In fact, it was pretty obvious that China was going to cement that new relationship, a comprehensive strategic partnership, agreements around access to minerals and resources. It was pretty obvious that sooner or later we would start to see something more than just Coast Guard visits, something more than ships that are just plying the Southern Ocean, heading down to scientific research in Antarctica. And clearly there's a higher level of confidence within China that they have an ability to undermine the relationships between New Zealand and traditional Pacific Island partner states. And they've just demonstrated that. So, people who might say, it doesn't mean to say that there'll be military based in Cook Islands, they might want to reflect on that now, because we simply don't know. And where there is uncertainty, there is always room for misinterpretation, and where there's room for misinterpretation, there's room for unforeseen actions and consequences of those. And I think China is demonstrating a capability. It's also by demonstrating our inability to do
Yes.
anything about it. And so there's a double message in there, which you convey politely with a smile and a shrug of the shoulder and saying, hey, it's nothing unusual. We're out here. It does remind me, that we in New Zealand, I remember when I put out the Strategic Defence Policy Statement back in 2018 and how certain people in the media hyperventilated because I dared to mention China and I dared to suggest. And I got Audrey Young and a whole bunch of highly regarded journalists shoving their microphones into my face, demanding that I retract and I apologise. And here we are today. Well, the world is not a benign little world. Human beings, as long as they've ever occupied planet Earth, have always been in conflict with each other, and most often around minerals, land, access to, and resources. And not only is the Pacific, as Judith Collins has said, a treasure trove in terms of natural resources, but we sit as the gateway to Antarctica, which is a quietly highly disputed conversation around whether or not signatories to the treaty should allow that treaty to be expanded to allow other people to access those resources. And it's not been lost on me that China has 5 bases down there now. It has a number of strategic airfields that are capable of landing strategic aircraft. And, that's a little bit more than we have for scientific research, which has always, for me, begged the question, what are they doing? What is their intent? Why do they need to be able to fly in so many aircraft, and why do they need so many bases to do simple scientific research around climate change, for golly sakes? I mean, there are always those doubts and always those suspicions. But one thing that's very clear is that, to their desire to expand their influence and their projection into the Southern Ocean, into the South Pacific, has always been there.
Yes.
And people who continue to pretend that it's not are only fooling themselves. Unfortunately, the Minister of Defence and the government have the responsibility of protecting the people of New Zealand, and sometimes the people of New Zealand can't see that they need protecting or don't agree on what from. Which
Ron, do you think also there's also a link with why we're seeing this now? Because, like you said, you've never seen it before. Is the fact that Trump seems to be cozying back up to Putin, which could make China and the rest of the world a little bit nervous. So
it's rather bizarre. Yeah. Look, it's a rather bizarre situation. Sorry.
I was just wondering if now, China, and Trump has threatened China with tariffs and all sorts of, come hell, come high water things. And again, this is their way of making sure that, like you said, they've got bases around the world. I wonder if Trump has also been a factor to seeing what we're seeing now.
Yeah, it's a rather bizarre circumstance that we're seeing unfolding. I mean, you have 3 communist states, and we all understand what communism is about, and they've never resiled from their desire to expand their influence and themselves across the globe. I mean, you now see North Korea collaborating very closely with Russia in the war in Ukraine. China has been, there've been lots of denials. There's still a hell of a lot of allegations, assertions, and a quantity of evidence to suggest that China too has been supplying Russia. That, on the other hand, the new American administration is being seen to be close to Russia is a little bit puzzling. But one thing has to be is clear to me is that with the United States administration increasingly at loggerheads with Europe over the Ukraine-Russian war, that creates a higher level of uncertainty. I think the United States has been very clear, or this administration has been very clear in the past of what it thinks of China and its expansionist plans. How important Taiwan and Japan and South Korea are to the American administration. So it's I guess China's just doing what China does, and it may well be that they have upped the ante a tad simply because of the confidence they've gained from the disagreement between Cook Islands and New Zealand, and the reality that they now have the blue water capability to deploy. And they are just sending that message. But There's a little bit more. I'm myself a bit bemused by why suddenly there is the conflict between Europe and the United States. But I do take some comfort in one thing, and here's the ironical twist: is if the United States position is resulting in the Europe becoming more consolidated, more united, and more committed to their own defence and their own security, then that is a very good thing, because Mr. Trump hasn't been wrong in some of his criticisms of them in the past. But I think right now I'm struggling to understand myself why he would be so be seen to be so pro-Russia right now. That is confusing.